Tuesday on Melrose Mountain in Tryon, North Carolina, higher ground. It's Mark chapter 6, beginning at verse 45. Jesus walking on the water. I tried that once. I'll show you the clip at the very end of this particular video, and you can see how well I did. Well, it's after they had fed the 5,000, and this account is found in 3 of the Gospels. It's found in Mark 6:45, but it's also found in Matthew 14, beginning at verse 22, and John chapter 6, beginning at verse 15. It's an interesting story because many preachers have preached many messages from this particular section of Scripture. Remember that they're over in Bethsaida. They're on the other side of the Sea of Galilee. Now again, remember the Sea of Galilee is 7 miles by 14 miles and is 130 feet deep. It tells us that the reason that Jesus is leaving Bethsaida, where they had gone for rest, was because of the crowds and the feeding of the 5,000, and now because of his healings and his teachings and his feeding, they wanted to make him king, even if they had to do it by force. That was not Jesus' plan. That was not what God sent him to earth for. And so he sends his disciples back to Capernaum by boat. It's night. Remember, it was late when he fed the crowd. And we find that they're on their way back to Capernaum while he goes up to pray on the mountain. It tells us that the disciples got midway in the sea. Of course, across the Sea of Galilee, it's about 7 miles. And remember, it's 130 feet deep. That takes care of all of those that say Jesus was walking on rocks and not on the water. And the wind and the waves are against the disciples. They're having quite a time. They're straining at the oars. According to Mark chapter 6, verse 47, they're midway through the sea. In Matthew chapter 6, verse 25, it says that it's the fourth watch, which is 3 to 6 a.m. And that as it was dark and as the sea was rough, in Matthew it tells us that they were terrified. They thought Jesus was a ghost walking on the water. Now remember, I had preached to you before that when Jesus said, let's go to the other side, he always promises and fulfills those promises. And they were going to make it to the other side. They just didn't have a lot of faith many times. And as he comes alongside, he says, take courage, it is I. Now, he had intended to walk on by them. I'm not sure why, but that was his original intention according to the Scriptures. And then we come, only in Matthew do we find in chapter 15, verses 28 through 31, the time that Peter called out to him and said, let me come to you. And you've heard many messages about that. Jesus had the courage to tell him to come on, and Peter had the courage to get out of the boat. And a lot of us don't have the courage to get out of the boat sometimes when Jesus calls to us and we want to come to him. And then, of course, the message is about how Peter took his eyes off Jesus and began to sink, and how Jesus had to pluck him out of the sea. Nevertheless, Peter did have the courage to get out of the boat, and Jesus did have the power to save him, even though he took his eyes off Jesus. So let's not take our eyes off Jesus. That's when we always get into sinking situations. And then we find when they both got into the boat, recorded for us in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 6, verse 21, they were immediately at land. Remember, they were only halfway across when all of this took place, and now just by getting into the boat's all the way on the other side in Capernaum. And it tells us that their hearts were hardened. They didn't understand all that Jesus had done. The feeding of 5,000, the miracles, the calming of the wind and the waves, the immediate arrival over into Capernaum. They were still pretty confused and still pretty much at questioning point of who Jesus really was. What did I see in this story? Well, I certainly see the miracles. I certainly see the courage of Peter. I certainly see what happens when we take our eyes off Jesus. But I also see that sometimes we seem to have lots of faith, and yet our faith falters when things aren't exactly as we think they ought to be. It's really important to keep our eyes on Jesus, and it's really important to be willing to get out of the boat and do something for Jesus. But most of all, it's important for us to keep steady faith, in spite of our circumstances, to keep our eyes on him and never doubt that he can do whatever he wants to do. That's your thought for the day. Don't forget to watch for the clip of what happened when I tried to walk on water. This is your thought for the day. God bless you.